Hello, in this video we will take a look at the parsing of the XML. Now, it may have been a sort of forgotten format for a while, but it's still being used. There are still structures and requirements to use those formats. We obviously are familiar with JSON these days, more or less, but the more important thing now in .NET 10 and the recent editions of .NET, we have a better way or a more performant way to split it. Now, some of the ways, some of the more traditional perhaps ways, as it become in recent years, are more easier to implement, and perhaps you should still stick to them, but we will perform some benchmarks here and take a look at those and just the differences in performance. But the new T-span editions and all those other arrangements regarding to that can be quite beneficial in terms of the performance. Now, without further ado, sort of just a simple overview why the new span arrangement can actually win here, and it will win here. We can look at the benchmarks and whatnot. Essentially, you have this XML document parser, and then you have a reader. The parser, of course, is the most complex because it builds a full DOM object for the XML, and then it gets the data through it. Of course, you can already probably guess, because we have that overhead, it's sort of the easiest and the most, perhaps we should say, reliable to implement as well. So if you don't have something too large, massive documents and such, you should probably go with that option. There's no reason to go with the span or the actual reader, but essentially, if you do have something that's perhaps a relatively simple structure, but you still have to deal with XML, or you still have to deal with some compliance, reliability, or one of those things. You would want to go with span, because that will be the quickest. You'll be able to control every little part of it, and you won't even need to certainly control that, but it will sort of recognize every little part, and very quickly it will go to where it needs to go, while the XDocument parser, which we'll get into in a second, it analyzes essentially the whole document. It creates a whole document in memory, you might even say, in some ways. And then you can go, you want to pick this, you want to pick that, you want to modify this, you want to modify that. So that's kind of how it works. Now, if you want to learn how to generate your XMLs and read your XMLs with the slow approach, of course, because the other is very custom, but in general, take a look at one of the previous videos in this channel regarding the XML. It's a very in-depth sort of introduction how you can generate XML files with certain structures and things, and how you can read them as well. But let's start taking a quick look at the document parser and reader and the span, and just to kind of quickly compare them. So in the document parser, we have, of course, a class, as we would usually do, but in this case, we just pass a file and essentially just reads it. Now, the more interesting part, of course, is not the reading the file, but this library actually does have availability to read the document, and I'm going to hover in this just quickly. In this case, from a file path, this solution is downloadable from the Patreon of this channel, and you can find some free courses as well from there for certain subscription tiers, and all of the other material, all the source code and stuff. But this will allow you to get it from different sources. Essentially, you can do it from text reader, from essentially from text, or from anything else you can download it from. So you just get your XML and you create your XML file. Now, other than that, we have essentially the doc. We want to create a doc at the end, and from the doc we can read all elements. And then we essentially just select the elements based on the attribute, but the attribute can also come from default, from the element. So in this case, again, if you want to go into more detail, watch a previous video, but essentially we create the doc, and then we read the record, and then we read the certain elements. So that's a sort of top of a tree, such, and then all the elements inside, we can read it like that, and we can parse them. We can not just parse them, but really you could put your own custom method, of course, and convert them to certain things, and then we just return the list and we play around with the list. And on the opposite side, of course, you can do creating the actual record itself and the actual document itself. So in this case, we're just loading, but you could write it as well. Again, watch the other video on that. But this is very easy. It makes it very easy to do. However, there is a massive overhead of just ignore all of this. This is just a convenience factor, but just doing the XDocument.Load part. This essentially creates a whole structure in your memory, of course, but that's not even the point. It's just the reading of it all and extrapolating of it all. So that creates a whole bulk of things. And if you have an absolutely massive document, and if you have millions of them, it will at some point become inefficient. So after this, we get to the next of a bit more efficient way, but not the most efficiently these days. So that's where we get to the parser. So essentially, we don't use that library, which is very fancy and does all the nice bits to kind of handle it perfectly. In this case, we just take the file path, we do XmlReader, which will read essentially every element, and this gives you a lot more sort of in-depth control in some ways, although not really. But if you're analyzing documents based on perhaps some very, very weird and unusual format, perhaps this is what you would have to use instead of the XML document showed before. And again, the other video sort of covers this as well. But there's no library difference or anything like that. In this case, again, we're just using system.xml, and that's it, really. But what we are now reading directly from those different nodes. So if you have your main, say, record, in this case, document, and main node in that case, we can go into name, and then we read all these different bits and pieces like that. So we read the values, and we read all these things, and then we can get into tags. And again, it depends on the format as well, whatever format you are reading. The next part, however, is the most custom. And again, this one, it allows you to read, let's say, we have a reader, and we get, let's say, attribute. From the reader, we get the attribute. Okay, so we still have the attribute. And then we have the node type. We read a specific node type. So it does do some of the parsing for you in this sort of a manner. It's a bit more manageable. While the final part, it is most efficient for sure, and it has to do how the spans are now allowed to be used and all that sort of stuff. And there are videos, separate videos actually on that, but specifically for XML, the spans, they do come quite in handy if you want to do those massive amounts of record, and all you care about is not just simplicity of development, or in fact, you shouldn't care at all about the simplicity of development, because it is not simple at all. Because as you can see in this arrangement now, you're doing everything completely manually. So you're not reading a document, you're not reading something related to even XML document. All you're reading is the complete text content of the XML document. And then we span it. We use span for different memory allocation, and no copying, essentially, for all these little allocations and such. The way you do it, you can do this with any text content that you read from a file. Is quite useful. You do it as span, massive performance improvement right away. But then we do actually need to convert it to a record. The record, whatever it may be, we need to convert it. And then we have this interesting thing, record start and record end. So these are essentially your raw elements in your XML file. And this doesn't have to be a record, this could be anything else. But then we're just reading the actual thing manually, which is sort of similar to what those libraries, some of those libraries might have inside them. But since we already have a very specific way and we worked on it a long time and we want to extract every sort of bit of memory that's not needed, we want to sort of get away from it, and we want to extract every bit of performance we can get from those servers or wherever it may be reading these things. So we do it completely manually. And because we use the span, that gives a massive improvement as well. That's a new thing. In general, of course, the main thing isn't just the span. It's just doing it straightforwardly as such, on your own sort of set of rules. So you avoid any other kind of parsing. You just use your own parsing. But like here, for example, we have a record start, and then we find the closing tags for the record, and that's not very interesting. But we can extract the details, and then we get into the record. So essentially you find the start and the ending, and then we extract the actual record. So we can go to the past record here. Now at this point we just reference to the existing span, which is part of a record, so like an item in a list essentially. And then we play around with it, and then we have additional handling. So this is again another helper method that will help us determine whether the element is this or that. And as a custom solution, this can work very well, but you will have to test it immensely, and it will have to be kind of custom. You can't really mess around with it in terms of giving users some flexibility. You can do that to some extent, and you can provide options, of course, but then in your own project development, it will require a lot more testing. What the user might do, what they are allowed to do, and all those things. In the other arrangements, perhaps you have a bit more of that flexibility, so you kind of already know based on the other users' experience, of course, based on those libraries. But just in general, what can you actually allow what can you actually allow to use the users, and what you must absolutely prevent. So those are a few differences. In this case, because of memory management and allocations and things like that, the span, of course, is the star of it in some way, but really it's just whether you choose your absolute custom solution, and you can reuse this code. It's available on Patreon. Go there and get the subscription and get some free courses as well. Very useful, very interesting, and all the source code from YouTube in depth is available on there as well. So it's quite useful, but still, when you do your own project, you need to consider, is it worth it, or do we just need a quick solution and let's forget these custom arrangements? So that's your decision, and with that said, we will conclude this video.